This has been quite a consequential Supreme Court term with several major decisions and a few more yet to come. Just this week, the justices have handed down rulings on the authority of the federal agencies, social media disinformation, emergency abortion care, and the opioid settlement. Now, we're taping this program on Friday morning, and it's likely more decisions will be issued later today after we tape, but before the program is broadcast. Lisa, what case stands out to you of note?
This week, the justices threw out a lawsuit brought by the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana against Biden administration agencies and officials, alleging that the federal government's efforts to persuade social media companies to take down disinformation about things like the COVID vaccine, election, alleged fraud, et cetera, constituted coercion in violation of the First Amendment. Now, the Supreme Court did not this week decide the First Amendment issue. Instead, they dismissed the case for lack of standing, which is the requirement that the plaintiffs actually have an injury, in fact, that is traceable to the government, in this case, conduct. And although the plaintiffs here had experienced takedowns, the court said, you've got to be able to show that the takedown you experienced was attributable to government action. And the reason I think this is significant is because it's the latest in a number of cases we've seen where the court has dismissed cases for lack of standing. And that's important because we've seen an increase in litigation brought by groups advancing partisan ideological agendas, trying to force big public law questions onto the federal court's dockets. And this is burdening the courts, it's injuring the courts, it's injuring the credibility of the courts. It's all wrapped up in nationwide injunctions and challenges to every act that a president takes. Anyway, I like to see when the court tightly applies the standing requirement to limit litigation.
Okay, I had made a note actually about it seems like there's more decisions that are narrow like that, and they're not actually deciding the core issue.
Yep.
So,
and I think that's a good thing.
And you're saying it's more substantive than trying to sidestep it.
Yeah, no, it is substantive.
Really,
I mean, standing is a constitutional requirement.
Sure.
So, but I also think that it's good that the court is enforcing that requirement to limit this kind of sort of litigation for sport and litigation to get these big public law issues onto the dockets.
Okay, Luke.
Well, one thing that stood out to me was the decision yesterday in Ohio, the EPA. This was a ruling basically to halt what the EPA has been doing in regards to regulating air pollution. In 2015, there were new standards that were applied, and part of that was this good neighbor plan, and this is trying to deal with Midwestern and Western states that produce air pollution that blows to eastern states like New York and make us sick and help kill us. And so the EPA said that these states, per regulation, have to create new plans to address the new standards. 23 states didn't do that, and then the EPA said, okay, we'll make the plan for you. And long story short, the Supreme Court said that wasn't a reasonable approach. I think it's unreasonable for these states to produce dangerous air that comes and hurts us. I have a daughter who has asthma. My mom is a lung cancer survivor. I would like to see these standards enforced properly, and I think the EPA is trying to do that.
Okay, and the agencies there, their authority seems to be curtailed.
Right, and the litigation will continue. I mean, the practical effect is that it'll be months, if not years, before this actually gets resolved, and the air pollution will continue to come in the meantime.
Okay, Tara.
The case I think is interesting is U.S. versus Rahimi, and basically it's a case where there was a domestic violence protection order, and the Rahimi basically had numerous firearms, had threatened people with domestic partners with firearms, and basically he's making the argument that he has a right to those firearms under the Second Amendment. Now, in the Bruin case, the Supreme Court has already ruled that you have a right to open carry in public places, and they based that decision on historical tradition of firearm regulation. And in the Rahimi case, the lower court basically said that there was no historical law warranting taking away the right to firearms for a case where there is an order of protection. And the problem here is that basically the Supreme Court has rejected laws disallowing guns to indigenous people enslaved, or rather, the Supreme Court rejected the idea that there were laws that disallowed guns to indigenous people, enslaved, et cetera. In other words, that historical argument it itself made. But what seems to be getting lost in this case is the fact that we're talking about a case where you're taking firearms away from someone who has a history of using them against domestic partners. There seems to be very little concern, at least in the lower courts, about the impact of this in domestic violence cases. And so I think it's going to be very important to watch how the Supreme Court decides this issue.
So the court, after the Bruin case, in establishing the historical precedents, the lower courts had to use that as their guidance, right? And so this actually, the way they decided this Rahimi case is a step back from sort of that some might call an extreme position on guns. But we didn't. They also, though, took a different approach to bump stocks on guns, which, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the difference in the two cases is Rahimi is about the Constitution and the bump stock case was about the statute and whether Congress, you know, the language of the statute. And, you know, Congress hadn't been specific. I mean, didn't deal with bump stocks, dealt with machine guns. And so anyway, there's an explanation for it. But
okay, and Michael, the case that you found.
I think what I'm a little anxious about is the upcoming immunity decision, you know, that will determine the nature of the American presidency and sort of separate America from other parts of the world where presidents and dictators and have complete autonomy, sovereignty, and control without any checks and balances over their actions. In many parts of the world, when a person leaves office, they leave the country because they know that at some point the former president is going to come after them and their families, right, and do terrible things, right? In addition, it also opens the door for the former president to be dutifully prosecuted for the crimes he has committed concerning the classified documents case. So for me, the immunity case is going to define the American presidency.
Mm-hmm. And we may, by the time this program is on the air, we may have a decision in that case. And I have no idea. Can't handicap that. I don't know.
Save the best for last, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's they have quite a crush of cases right at the end of the
six
term.
or eight left as we sit here this morning.
So
And I still don't know why they rushed themselves, this particular court, where they wait till the last minute to do things. They have all these months to do things. I'll let other people think about that.
Okay.